Greetings hobbyists, this is Artisans of Mould. And in this video we're going to be having a look at a workflow project where we're going to combine some 3D design but also some more traditional casting methods. So I thought this was an interesting project to document because it was just something I was trying out, but it was just nice because it combines some things that I do now, 3D printing and 3D design, with some things I've done in the past like casting and mould making. So we're going to go through this relatively quickly. It's more a demonstration than actually a tutorial, but if you like this, please give this a like and say so in the comment section. Likewise, if you don't really like this, also say in the comment section so I know, otherwise I don't know what people want to see. So we're starting this off in Blender, which is a free bit of software, and I'm just going to make this block, which is going to be our road section. As I say, this isn't a tutorial, but I've got my screencast keys so you can see what I'm doing, and if you slowed this down, you could probably follow along if you chose to, but if you want me to do this in a slower process tutorial, then let me know, and I can talk through what I'm doing a bit more gradually. Now I'm doing this in Blender because, well, it's going to be relatively cheap to print it out, and it means that everything is exact. I can set the exact sizing, and then I can make the holes for the bolts, and they're going to be printed with a different material. I'll talk about that in a second. So all we're doing is just setting up each of those holes and booleaning them out, and then importantly I'm setting them up so that they've got this point at the bottom. And that's going to make the 3D printing a bit easier in the way that I'm aiming to do it, because I'm actually going to print this upside down, which I know sounds like a little bit of an odd choice when we could print this the right way up with the mold already part of this model, but I'm doing this as separate pieces because I'm trying to make the best use as I can of all of the different materials. And we're going to make the most of the fact that an FDM printer bed has a really nice texture for a road section, so we're going to take advantage of that in this process. So I've just got this in our Creality Slicer software, and I'm going to rotate this around so it's upside down. And that's one of the reasons why these holes being pointed is important. It means that we're not going to need to support them, whereas flat surfaces would cause an issue. And we can see that printing this is going to cost, what, a bit under £1, so pretty cheap for a base model. Now I did manage to lose the footage of the printing, so sorry about that, but you can see here what I mean about it getting this nice texture from the build plate, and that's going to look really good as the road surface. So back to Blender to create the frames for these molds, and this is a really easy thing to do. All I'm going to do is just nick the bottom surface, expand it out a bit, add the sides and solidify it to maybe 2 or 3 millimeters thick. Now normally I'd use something like Lego for this because it's kind of reusable, but I can't seem to find wherever that's gone. It must have been tidied somewhere. And this is actually going to be a pretty cheap solution, and we'll just crack the edge of this to get the mold out. So it's probably going to work out cheaper than the Lego would unless I was going to do this a lot. And while Lego is reusable, after a while it kind of gets a little bit hard to use again because it gets super glue on it and stuff. So this is going to work quite nicely. Now while I've been showing this for a small section, I've also been doing this for a larger road section. You can see the results of that here, and all I'm going to do is glue the road sections into the mold frame. And again, I had to do this as 2 separate bits because I wanted that nice road texture, otherwise we could have actually just done this as one piece, and that would have been really easy to do and print out. But as this isn't one piece, I'm going to need to glue these in because these are fairly light. The plastic printing is almost nearly hollow, which means that they're going to float in the RTV rubber, which we really wouldn't want. It would ruin everything. So I'm just going to put super glue around the edges so that the mold material won't go underneath this, and then we'll just glue them in pretty centered, or as best as we can do. For the mould itself, I'm going to be using this RTV rubber from Neil's Materials. It's pretty fast set, so it will set in about 6 to 8 hours. But before we do that, we're going to need to use some scales for this, and my pro tip is, if you get some scales, it's always a really good idea to wrap them in a couple of layers of cling film. And beyond a good idea, I'd say this is nearly essential. It's the only way I've reliably found of using the kitchen scales without receiving an uppercut to the pelvis from my slightly angry and heavily pregnant wife. So I'd call this pretty essential. So once we've averted any potential problems from spillage onto our scales, it's just a matter of mixing up the RTV rubber, and in this instance it's about a 1 to 10 ratio of the rubber to the catalyst, so it's pretty easy to weigh out. Now if you do want to do this yourself, and it is really worth trying, it's quite a nice fun thing to do, but do make sure you mix this up really well. You've got a good 10 minutes worth of pot life before you need to get this all poured in, so you can really spend your time making sure this is really well mixed. And when I'm doing this, I really like to actually have 2 cups on hand, and I'll actually pour this out from one cup into the other and then start remixing it, so you don't get any material that's left on the side of the cup that you might not have mixed in fully. And I find that gives me a really good mix, and I don't end up with any of the RTV rubber that hasn't made contact with the catalyst, which could potentially ruin your mould. So that's really worth doing for the sake of a cheap plastic cup. Then we can just pour the rubber into our mould. I'm going to start with each of the bits where there's an indent to make sure that it's really fully filled in, and then we just pour it in basically. This hasn't got any undercuts or things like that to cause any problems with air bubbles, so I don't need to use a vacuum pump for this really at all. So this is going to be pretty simple to do. And most terrain is kind of alright unless you're going to have a load of really complex shapes. So you don't need to worry about things like vacuum pumps, I've found in most instances. For me, this small mould used about 1.5 to 2 cups worth of the RTV rubber, so I got both of these done for 1 kilo of RTV rubber. And then I'm just breaking the mould and then just pulling this apart so that we can pull the mould out. And there we go, really nice and good to go. We've got a little bit of rubber that's seeped under at one corner, but we'll just cut that off with a knife and we'll be good to go with our casting. For that, I'm going to be using this plaster. I think it's called something like Stone Cast. And having done a bit of experimentation, I found this gets a really nice texture to it when it gets broken apart, which is the whole point of this. I want that nice broken apart texture. We just mix it with some water. Again, all the proportions are on the packet. Mix it up, and then we're just going to pour it into our mould. And for that, I've placed it on the top of this plastic box, and that's so that if when I pour this in, I find that the table isn't perfectly level, which it almost certainly isn't, I can just use some little shims, some little bits of plasticard to even out the leveling of this and get this so that I'm going to have an even thickness of my pour all over the mould. Otherwise, the road's going to look a little bit uneven when I start making multiples of these. And that's one of the bonuses with this over 3D printing. The set time of this plaster is about 20 to 30 minutes, so making multiples of these is going to be potentially really quick, and definitely quicker than 3D printing in many ways. While that's setting, we'll quickly design the bolts that are going to be bolting this into where the road needs to be. I kind of think of these as prefabricated blocks. And I'm just going to bring back the cutter that was used to make the hole, shrink it down a bit, and then just add some detailing. So I'm going to add some edges that's going to go over the hole so we can't see the edging of it, and also it's going to keep it mounted really nicely, and then just make some internal detailing that shows how this would be bolted to the road surface. Once again, I've got that point at the bottom, so it's going to fit in the hole, but it also means we're going to be able to 3D print this really easily with just one single support holding it from the base. And for this, so we get more detail, we're going to be using a resin 3D printer, and then we can add this into our cast plaster surface. So once again, we're doing all that we can to get the best from each of our individual materials so that we end up with a nice looking terrain piece at the end of all of this. I think I left this for about 40 minutes in the end, but as you can see, it comes out really nicely. We've got that textured surface that we want from the 3D print, and all we need to do now is seal this really quickly. So I'm just going to use some PVA mixed with water. So that's just been mixed up in about a 2-to-1 ratio of water to PVA glue, somewhere between there and 1-to-1. And all we're doing is just liberally applying that on the top, and that's just going to seal off the porous surface so it won't eat up paint or super glue. Otherwise, we're just going to go through rattle can after rattle can of paint onto this thing. And if you've ever had replastered walls, this is basically the same process. We just need to make sure that it becomes a non-porous surface. With that dried, here's our 3D printed bolts. They've come out really nicely. You can see we haven't had to use a lot of supports for these. Now this has already been post-cured, so there's no problem with me using my bare hands on these. And then we'll just super glue these into each of the holes on the corners of our road. Now this was the scary bit where it was all going to potentially go wrong. What I've got is a bit of plasticard that I'm going to put underneath this, and essentially I need to break this up to get the nice fractured texture. So you can see I'm hitting this on the bottom side, so I'm not going to damage that really nice surface we've got on the top. And all I'm going to do is put this together a bit like a jigsaw puzzle as I break it up. Now, what I want is a bit more broken up in the center. So again, I'll choose my bits that seem to work and hopefully hit it and get some good fractures in the right places. And I thought I was happy here, but in the end, I decided I wanted this sort of larger central section to show off that nice texture on the side of our plaster parts. And then it was just a matter of gluing everything together with super glue. I used a little bit of green stuff underneath each of the pieces to make sure it glued on really well. And you can see we end up with this really nice end result with these really realistic looking cracks that aren't too wide, they just look about right. And then we've got that nice texture on the edge of the broken plaster where we've got the raised up bit of the road. So here's a few better photos of the end results to give you a bit of an idea of what we've ended up with. Hopefully you enjoyed this as much as I did. I thought this was a lot of fun and bringing together a load of different processes to give a nice end result. As I said at the beginning, if you did find this interesting, hit that like button so I know to do more content like this, or if you didn't like it, do say in the comments section or anything you feel could be done more of or less of in this video. I'll also mention in the description there's a link to the Patreon, and obviously the patrons get the final say on most of what I do because they're the ones that really help support the channel the most. So thank you once again to all of you patrons out there. It really does allow me to do these videos and put the time towards creating this content. So I hope to see you for the next video, and have a great day.